There are dozens of steroids out there, but somehow one of them became a meme, a personality trait, and basically the mascot of modern gym culture. Trenbolone. So how did a drug that was never approved as human medicine become basically the most famous steroid on the entire internet? So what even is Tren? Trenbolone is a synthetic anabolic androgenic steroid, otherwise known as an AAS. In simple terms, it's part of the same broad drug class that people associate with anabolic steroids and testosterone-like effects. What's funny about this compound is that it's actually used commonly in a veterinary standpoint for cattle implants, where it's used to increase weight gain and improve feed efficiency. The contrast between using it for animals and humans is what makes its popularity in bodybuilding so strange. Tren has developed a reputation in bodybuilding for being an unusually powerful physique/performance enhancing drug, particularly around muscularity, strength, and body composition. And that reputation is really where the legend of Tren begins. Now there is two different esters for Trenbolone. There is Trenbolone enanthate and there is Trenbolone acetate. Both do the exact same thing, it's just one of them takes longer to kick in than the other. Trenbolone enanthate has a half-life of around 11 days, and it takes roughly 3 to 4 weeks before you'll really start to feel and see the results. On the other hand, Trenbolone acetate only has a half-life of 1 to 3 days and kicks in within days after your first injection. That said, Trenbolone acetate requires much more frequent injections as its half-life is so short. This means that it gets in and out of your system very quickly, unlike Trenbolone enanthate. The thing about Tren is that you literally cannot get a prescription for it, which means that any human evidence is really a major limitation for this compound. So when people online say, oh, Tren did this to me, or oh, Tren did that to me, they really don't have any credibility besides how it affected them. Just because it affected them in a certain way does not mean it's going to affect other people in that exact same way. Trenbolone is also the most powerful anabolic steroid there is today, hence why it's so popular. But like anything built with steroids, there are major side effects to come with it. So if Tren was never even approved as a modern human medicine, how did it become arguably the most infamous steroid in bodybuilding? The answer is actually pretty simple. The results built the legend. Tren developed a reputation for producing a combination of effects that bodybuilders obviously care about. A highly muscular look, strength, and dramatic changes in body composition. And this is where Tren really starts to separate itself in bodybuilding culture. It isn't just associated with getting bigger, it's associated with getting bigger while maintaining that hard, lean, and almost grainy look you see in extremely conditioned bodybuilders. That's important because Tren doesn't aromatize into estrogen unlike testosterone. But don't confuse that with Tren having zero estrogen-related side effects, especially when other compounds are involved. Then there's Tren strength. Tren has developed a reputation among users for significant increases in strength and training performance. And when somebody is getting stronger, training harder, and recovering differently, and carrying more muscle at the same time, you can understand why word spreads pretty quickly in bodybuilding circles. But here's where things really get exaggerated. You will constantly hear people say, oh, Tren is 5 times more anabolic than testosterone. You'll see those famous 500 to 500 versus testosterone's 100 to 100 anabolic to androgenic ratings thrown everywhere online. But you have to remember that those numbers do not mean that taking Tren gives you 5 times the muscle growth of testosterone. That's just not how it works. Those ratings come from experimental models and aren't a direct prediction of how many pounds of muscle a human being will gain. Now, Tren does have very strong androgen receptor activity, but receptor affinity and old anabolic androgenic ratios aren't muscle gain calculators. And that's actually what makes the legend interesting. Tren doesn't need to literally be 5 times more anabolic than testosterone for people to be obsessed with it. It just needs to produce sufficiently dramatic results in bodybuilding for stories and transformations to spread. One guy could get ridiculously lean and the other guy could get ridiculously strong. And another one posts a transformation online. Eventually, Tren stops being just another anabolic steroid. It becomes the steroid. And that's where social media took that reputation and absolutely ran with it. This is where things kind of start getting a little bit ridiculous with Tren and what you guys see online. Because somewhere along the line, Tren stopped being just a steroid used in hardcore bodybuilding and became an actual internet meme, as I'm sure many of you guys have seen today. If you spent more than 5 minutes on Gym Talk, Instagram Reels, or fitness YouTube, you've probably heard some of these sayings: hop on Tren, Tren hard, eat clean, Tren hard, and a bunch of other ones. Some dude gets rejected by a girl, oh, hop on Tren. Can't bench 225? No, you gotta hop on Tren, bro. Your girlfriend breaks up with you? Oh, it's Tren time, bro. And obviously most of this is just satire. But what's interesting is just how recognizable the word Tren has become. Think about it, there are tons of anabolic steroids. Deca, Anavar, Winstrol, Primobolan, testosterone, the list goes on. But none of them became this personality trait quite like Tren did. And social media is basically the perfect environment for something like this. Extreme transformations get views. Crazy gym stories get views. Talking about the most hardcore steroids also gets views. So every transformation, every Tren horror story, every meme, and every influencer talking about it just adds another layer to the legend of Tren. Eventually, you don't even have to know what Trenbolone actually is to know what Tren means. It basically became the internet shorthand for I'm about to take bodybuilding way too far. And not to mention, fitness influencers took that meme and turned the volume up even farther. Because at the end of the day, you have to think about what performs well in fitness content. Huge physiques, insane transformations, massive lifts. Basically, the more extreme something is, the more attention it's gonna get. And Tren already had the perfect reputation for that environment. You even have creators like the Tren twins, whose name literally references Tren. And whether someone actually uses Tren or not isn't really the point. The fact that you can build recognizable fitness branding around the word shows you how culturally relevant it's become. 10 or even 15 years ago, the average teenager getting into the gym probably wasn't constantly hearing conversations about Trenbolone. Now you can be 16 years old, download TikTok, watch fitness content for a few weeks, and suddenly you're hearing about Tren, testosterone, peptides, growth hormone, and blood work before you even figured out how to properly bench press. That's a massive change in gym culture. And there's actually another part of this that I think gets even more overlooked. Social media doesn't necessarily reward context, it rewards attention. A 30-second transformation showing someone getting absolutely shredded is exciting, but a 25-minute discussion about cardiovascular risk, blood pressure, fertility, lipids, sleep, and long-term health, not so much. So people repeatedly see the most impressive side of PED use while the consequences are much harder to fit into the highlighted reel. And that's why I think the obsession around Tren can actually become really dangerous. Because behind all the memes, transformations, and hop on Tren jokes, we're still talking about a really powerful anabolic steroid with real potential consequences. And those consequences are where the jokes stop being quite as funny. Now let's dive into the side of Tren that not a lot of people want to talk about, otherwise known as the dark side of Tren. Tren has a reputation for producing extreme results, but it also has an equally extreme reputation for the side effects. And before we go any further, there's something important to understand. Compared with drugs that are actually approved and extensively studied in humans, the quality of human research specifically on Trenbolone is very, very limited, as mentioned before. So I'm not just going to sit here and pretend that every single Tren horror story you read on Reddit is a scientific fact. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be concerned about with Trenbolone. Anabolic steroid use in general has been associated with cardiovascular problems, including changes in blood pressure, cholesterol, heart structure, and cardiovascular risk. And Tren users commonly report another category of problems that become almost as famous as the physiques themselves: insomnia, Tren sweats, irritability and mood changes, changes in libido and sexual function. And then there's probably the weirdest one that you probably see online all the time: Tren cough. And if you've never heard of Tren cough, it's basically the name users have given to an intense coughing episode that can occur shortly after an injection. And this is where I think the internet has created a really strange relationship with Tren. Some of the side effects have literally become part of the meme. Can't sleep? Tren. Sweating through your sheets? Tren. Suddenly angry at everybody? Tren. And again, we need to be careful because antidotes aren't controlled research, and not every physiological and physical problem that someone experiences while using multiple PEDs can automatically be blamed onto one single compound. But here's the bigger point. When a drug becomes famous, partly because people talk about it and how brutal the side effects can be, and people still want to take it and become even more interested in taking it, this tells you that this isn't about only pharmacology anymore. There's psychology also involved. Because for some people, hearing that Tren is the most hardcore extreme steroid doesn't make them want to stay away from it. It makes them want it even more. So that raises the question, why do people still want it? Fitness culture has always rewarded extremes. Being muscular isn't enough. You want to be bigger. Being lean isn't enough. You want to be shredded. Being strong isn't enough. You want numbers that make people stop scrolling and look at their screen in awe. And Tren has basically become the chemical representation of that mentality. It's viewed as extreme, hardcore, and something you graduate to when normal isn't enough for you anymore. And weirdly enough, the reputation for side effects can actually add to that image. Tell somebody about a compound that is mild and boring and nobody makes memes about it. But tell them that it's one of the most notorious steroids in bodybuilding, now you've created a forbidden fruit. For some people, the warning itself actually becomes part of the attraction. Now, there's also the comparison trap. You spend every single day scrolling through genetically gifted, enhanced physiques under perfect lighting, and eventually your own progress can start looking slow. Hence why comparison is the thief of joy. Years of training suddenly doesn't sound very appealing when your feed is just showing you transformations condensed into 30-second clips. And that's where impatience enters the equation. People don't just want an incredible physique anymore, they want it now. And suddenly the obsession with Tren makes a lot more sense. But there's one final question that we haven't answered. Does Tren actually deserve the legendary status that the internet has given it? Or have we been fooled into taking a compound that seems like it's a magic formula for every problem we've ever had, while the side effects stay hidden underneath? And I think that we need to separate this into two different questions. Is Tren powerful? Which clearly, yes, it's powerful and has earned a serious reputation within bodybuilding. But is something being powerful the same thing as being a smart decision? And that's where I'd say absolutely not. And that is probably the biggest problem with the way Tren gets discussed online. People hear the words like stronger, harder, more anabolic, or better results, and automatically translate it into better. But pharmacology doesn't work like a video game where you simply pick the strongest character. The potential results are only one side of the equation. You have to also consider the potential cardiovascular effects, endocrine effects, psychological effects, sleep problems, and importantly, how much uncertainty still exists because Trenbolone simply doesn't have the extensive controlled human research that all these other approved medications do. And that's why I think that both sides of the Tren conversation get it wrong. The people who act like Tren is some magical shortcut to becoming a bodybuilder and oversimplifying it, but so are the people who take every insane Tren story they've ever heard online and present it as a guaranteed scientific fact. The truth is more complicated. Tren is a very powerful anabolic steroid with a legendary reputation in bodybuilding. But somewhere between bodybuilding, social media, transformations, influencers, and memes, the reputation became bigger than the drug itself. And I think that's the real answer to why everybody is obsessed with Tren. It's not just a steroid anymore. It's become a symbol of taking bodybuilding to the absolute extreme. And whether that's something that we should be celebrating or making jokes about is an entirely different conversation. If you guys enjoyed this episode, subscribe because we got a lot more to cover and I've got a lot more coming for you guys. Until next time, peace.